Hello everyone, and welcome back to the third video in my tutorial series, JavaScript for Beginners. Now in this video we are going to be covering loops. And loops are essentially what allows us to run a certain piece of code or multiple lines of code many times, either a certain number of times or until a certain condition is met. And for example, let's say you wanted to draw a square with your code. Well, that would involve going a straight line and then turning, going a straight line and turning, going a straight line and turning, and going a straight line and turning. And if you notice there, we said going a straight line and turning 4 times. So for example, if you had code, you could either write that out to do that, or you could just loop, go straight line and turn 4 times. And that allows you to write less code and make it more simple. And another example of why you might want to use loops is if you are designing a game, for example, you want the game code to keep on running until the game is over. So you would basically have a loop that says if the game isn't over, then keep running the code. And then when it is over, then stop. And that's what loops are for. So to go ahead and get started, we want to open up Visual Studio Code here and hit the Explorer as always, open folder. And then we want to go to our code folder, sorry. So in the last video, we left off covering conditionals here. For now, we're going to delete this code, and we'll probably write something similar in the future. For now, we're actually going to delete the entire file. So go ahead and you can do Control A and then backspace to delete it all. And we are going to start from scratch. So the first kind of loop that we're going to look at is the while loop. For example, let's go ahead and say we wanted to loop something 10 times. So we can create a variable. Remember, let is how you start a variable, and then type counter, for example, equals 0, and then a semicolon. And don't forget, you always put semicolons at the end of JavaScript statements. So after that line, we could type while, and then inside, just like an if statement, if you remember, if we type if and then open parentheses, we want to put a condition in here. And basically what this is going to do is it'll loop until the condition is no longer true. So we can say while the counter is less than 5, for example, and we notice counter is 0, and so that means at the moment it is less than 5. Remember, we can kind of just paste that in there. We're checking while 0 is less than 5, at least on the first iteration. Then we can say console.log this counter or something like that, and then go ahead and say counter. And I didn't teach you guys this, but if you remember when I was saying the equal sign stands for the assignment operator, well, you can use the equal sign for more cases than just creating a variable like this. You can actually write something like this: counter equals counter plus 1. And what this is going to do is, remember, it takes what's on the right, which in this case is 1 because it's 0 plus 1, and then it actually assigns that assignment operator into counter. So what that's going to do is it's going to update the counter variable to 1. And then after it reaches this curly brace here, it'll go back up to the top and recheck the condition. Is the counter still less than 5? Well, at this point it's 1. And then it'll go through again and again. So to actually see that in action, remember we're going to open our index.html and then hit the Go Live button. That'll take a second, and then right-click and hit Inspect and go to our console. We want to reload here. So if you'll notice, Chrome actually kind of shorthands this, but it prints this counter. And if you'll notice on my screen here, there's a little 5 to the left. And what that means is it actually printed that 5 times. For reference, if I only print, or let's say I set the counter while counter is less than 1, so that this only runs once, and I reload, it'll only print it once, and notice that the 5 is gone. But for now, we're going to keep that at 5. So that's the basic loop syntax. The way you write it, again, is you type while, and then you open a parentheses. And inside here, you want to have your condition. And for us, it's counter is less than 5. So as long as this counter variable is less than 5, we are going to keep running whatever is inside these curly braces. And what is inside is we are printing. Remember, console.log is a print. We're printing the word this counter. And then we are going ahead and setting counter equal to counter plus 1, which means First it'll start at 0, then it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then 3, then 4, and then finally, eventually counter will be 5 on the 5th time around the loop, and then it'll check, is 5 less than 5? It's not, and then it'll just exit, and that's why the loop stops. So the second type of loop that we will be learning is called the for loop. Now this one is slightly more advanced, but you can think of it similarly to a while loop. In fact, what I can actually do is type for, and then the syntax in here is this is not just a condition. Inside you can actually declare a variable. So for example, we can say let, and let's go ahead and kind of delete this code for now. We can say let counter, like we wrote before, equals 0, and then we want to put a semicolon. Counter is less than 5, another semicolon, and then counter equals counter plus 1. And notice, this is kind of like combining when we wrote here. Like we wrote let, I'm just going to name this variable a, since you can't actually have two variables with the same name. And then we are going to say while a is less than 5, this is the same thing we wrote before, console.log this counter, and then a equals a plus 1. And then I'm going to do that here. Notice that this let counter equals 0 is kind of like this line here. Counter is less than 5 is like the condition inside the while loop. And then counter equals counter plus 1 is like the last thing we do on line 4 here. So this syntax is basically saying we want to start a counter variable at 0. That's called the initialization section of the for loop. It's the first of the 3 sections. And then after the semicolon here, it's called the condition section, where we are checking if we want to keep doing the loop or if we want to leave the loop. And in this case, we are checking if the counter is less than 5. And the third section is called the increment or the update section of the loop. And in this section, we are updating counter. We are making it counter equals counter plus 1. And then now, the only thing we have to do here is type in this counter. So if I go ahead and save this and reload, notice it prints this counter 5 times, like originally, and then it prints this counter 5 times again, down here. Notice that these two things are doing the same thing, but in the case where we actually want to repeat the same code a certain number of times, like for example here, we want to repeat it 5 times, it's usually simpler to use a for loop. You'll see there's less code and it looks a little bit nicer. This is kind of like a whole blob, and then this is just 3 lines here. So those are the basic syntaxes of loops. Now, why you might be wondering, like, why do I want to use this? Well, for one example, let's go back to that square example. So we want to go ahead and do a for loop for a square, because remember, a square you want to draw 4 times, or like print something 4 times, then you would use a for. And a while loop, you would usually use it when you don't know exactly when you're going to want to stop. So for example, we'll go for let side equals 0, side is less than 4, because we know square has 4 sides, and then we can say side equals side plus 1, and then open that. Now the way to actually, or all we're going to do in this for loop is we're just going to print the side. So remember, to print we do a console.log, and then remember we don't have to put single quotes. If we want to actually print the variable itself, we could type in the variable name, like side, like this, because side is a variable. And then if we save this and reload, sorry, I think I messed up the syntax a little bit here. Yep, I said side plus 1. And notice what I just did there actually was I created an infinite loop on accident. And what that means is this loop will never stop running. So it's kind of breaking my computer right now. I'm going to go ahead and close that and then reopen it. And you see I kind of actually broke it. So I'm going to click this right here to stop the live server, which was the same button that said go live. And then I'm going to restart it. And then that should fix everything. Oops. There we go. So we're back in here. And as you can see here, it types in 0, 1, 2, 3. And remember, we set side equals 0, and then we had it run 4 times, and we printed the side variable. So this is actually what we want to do. Now, it's interesting to note that it actually starts on 0 and not 1. And the reason for that will be further explained in future videos, but the gist is, in programming, we generally deal with 0-base notation. And what that means is the first item in a list of something is not the first item, it's not the one item, it's the 0 item. And that's just kind of a thing, like if you look back in history, there was a certain advantage to using a zero-based indexing system, but basically that's how most programming languages work today. So just a thing to keep in mind. So that was the example of the for loop. And now let's create a simple example for the while loop. So we can do while, let me try to think. Here, this will be a cool example. So let name, or my name, equals an empty string. And notice there's 2 single quotations next to each other with nothing inside. So that's just a string with no characters, basically. And then we want to say while my name, and then remember when we typed in 2 equal signs? Well, that in JavaScript, again, means that the 2 things on each side are equal to each other. But what we can actually do is there's something called not equal. So you say, like, if 2 things are equal to each other, but what if you want to say 2 things are not equal to each other? Well, the first thing you do is you delete the first equal sign and you replace it with an exclamation point. And sorry, my editor actually updates that, but you want to put an exclamation point and then an equal sign. And my editor makes it look like a not equal, but you might see only an exclamation and then an equal sign, and that looks right. So if you come here, my name is not equal to, and then we can put another string like ABC or AAA, for example. So this loop right here will keep running while my name is not equal to AAA. And as an empty string, it's definitely not equal. So if we open that up, what we can say is my name equals my name plus A. And this is a cool little example because every time we run the loop, we are going to add another A to my name. So if we reload this, it doesn't do anything. But if we console.log my name here, and we reload again, you'll notice it goes A, AA, and then AAA. And once it is AAA, this is no longer true, and it leaves the loop. So this has been the basics of loops. I hope you can see that they are like really useful in programming. They basically allow us to run code a certain number of times or until a certain condition is met. Now in the next video, we are going to be talking about a very powerful feature in programming called functions. Now functions are basically a way that we can make a certain bundle of code or a certain number of lines, and we can run them in various different places. So like up until now, you notice we've been writing code top down. So like we write code and then it comes here and it runs this, and then it comes down here and it runs this. But with functions, we can actually make the code jump around. Like it runs this here, it runs that over there, and then it runs something down there. And that allows us to create much more complex behavior. So yeah, if you want to see more videos in this series, go ahead and check out the playlist, link in the description, where I'll be uploading daily. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notifications whenever I upload new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.